His reality fractured the moment he stepped off the battlefield. What followed wasn't life, it was a purgatory painted in hallucinations, demons, and memories too painful to be human. Jacob's Ladder wasn't just a psychological horror film. It was a descent into the mind of a man haunted by war, stitched together by paranoia, guilt, and a truth so terrifying it dared not speak its name. Released in 1990, Jacob's Ladder slipped under the radar for many, dismissed by audiences who didn't quite understand what they had witnessed. But beneath its feverish cuts and grotesque imagery lies a story rooted in real military experiments, biblical allegories, and philosophical meditations on life, death, and the possibility of something in between. Everything in the film, from the twitching head movements to the subway scenes to the surgical nightmare sequences, was designed to destabilize you. And it worked. Jacob's Ladder didn't just influence horror, it rewired it. So if you thought you understood this film the first time you watched it, think again. The production was more cursed than you realize. The script darker than it was ever allowed to be. And the imagery, borrowed heavily by games and films that came after. These are 20 weird facts you didn't know about Jacob's Ladder. Fact number 1. The movie was inspired by real military experiments. The film's most terrifying idea wasn't fiction, it was history. The drug BZ, mentioned in Jacob's Ladder, was based on real chemical experiments allegedly conducted by the U.S. military during the Vietnam War. Known as 3-quinaclidinyl benzylate, BZ was a powerful hallucinogen that could disorient soldiers for days. Rumors swirled for years that American troops had been unknowingly dosed with it in live combat scenarios as part of a top-secret psychological warfare program. Screenwriter Bruce Joel Rubin stumbled across these rumors during his research, and what he found disturbed him. The paranoia, the breakdown of reality, the lingering terror, it all aligned too perfectly with the disjointed trauma faced by veterans. He didn't just want to write a horror story. He wanted to write a confession hidden in allegory. That's why Jacob's visions aren't just nightmarish. They're chemically induced simulations of a man's mind falling apart. The line between dream and drug is never clear. And that's the point. The scariest part? Decades later, the Pentagon quietly declassified documents confirming that BZ was indeed tested on soldiers. Fact number 2. The script was so dark, Hollywood wanted it sanitized. Before Tim Robbins ever picked up the script, Jacob's Ladder was deemed too disturbing to produce. Bruce Joel Rubin's original draft was described by studios as nihilistic, unmarketable, and deeply upsetting. It portrayed death not as a dramatic climax, but as a slow, chaotic unraveling of identity. There were no heroic arcs, no feel-good resolutions, just a man being torn apart by his past in increasingly horrifying visions. Multiple producteurs passed. One executive reportedly said, "This is a career killer. No one wants to be associated with something this bleak." Even when Adrian Lyne came aboard to direct, he was asked to tone it down. The original ending was more hopeless. The hallucinations were more grotesque. The descent into madness had no ladder, only freefall. But Lyne resisted sanitizing it completely. He believed horror needed to feel personal, even if that meant uncomfortable. So compromises were made, but the core was preserved. A man who doesn't know he's already dead. And when the final cut was tested on audiences, several people reportedly walked out. One executive's note read, "I don't know what I just watched, but it scared me in a way I can't explain." Fact number 3. Jacob's twitching demons changed horror forever. You've seen it before. The unnerving, jerky motion, the sudden head twitches, the way something almost human moves in impossible ways. But Jacob's Ladder was the first to do it. Adrian Lyne and special effects artist Michael Cavanaugh developed a technique where actors were filmed moving their heads rapidly at low shutter speeds. Then the footage was sped up in post. The result? Movements that felt both mechanical and demonic, like a corrupted file trying to act human. This visual became iconic. It would later be adopted and amplified in games like Silent Hill, horror films like The Ring, The Grudge, and even in music videos. At the time, it was completely new. No CGI, no prosthetic tricks, just camera manipulation and human discomfort. The demons in Jacob's Ladder weren't traditional monsters. They were warped reflections of Jacob's trauma, visualized through abstract motion and shadow. Their facelessness wasn't lazy design, it was intentional. The demons had no identity because Jacob had lost his own. And decades later, horror filmmakers are still copying that same twitch. Because once you see it, it never leaves. Fact number 4. The hospital scene was shot in a real abandoned asylum. There's a reason the hospital scene feels too real to be just a set. That's because it wasn't. The nightmarish sequence where Jacob is wheeled on a gurney through a hellish hospital corridor was filmed inside a real condemned mental institution in Brooklyn, the Wingate facility, a decommissioned section of the Kings County Hospital. The crew found old surgical tools, rusted gurneys, and even scattered patient files still inside. Rather than stage a horror set, they simply turned on the cameras. Dead rats, peeling walls, blood-stained mattresses, it was all authentic. Adrian Lyne instructed the crew to use what's there and let the building's decay do the storytelling. The hospital felt like it was decaying in real time, mirroring Jacob's own mental collapse. And because the place was unsafe, the actors were only allowed in for short bursts, making every take feel frantic, claustrophobic. The grotesque montage of body parts, mutilated figures, and faceless staff, almost none of it was storyboarded. The chaos was intentionally improvised. To this day, several cast members refused to talk about filming that scene. One simply said it was haunted, and not just by performance. Fact number 5. The subway platform that leads nowhere exists. In one of the film's most unsettling moments, Jacob finds himself alone on a subway platform as a train rushes by and no one else seems to notice. The platform? It's real. That scene was shot deep inside the Court Street subway station in Brooklyn, an abandoned station closed to the public since 1946. Forgotten by most New Yorkers, the platform became a popular location for film crews needing eerie underground shots. But in Jacob's Ladder, it was used with chilling precision. The emptiness, the flickering lights, the train that arrives but refuses to stop. Everything about the scene was designed to simulate disassociation, a moment where you feel the world has continued without you. To heighten the eeriness, production left the station untouched. Graffiti, trash, rats, none of it was set dressing. And that tunnel Jacob stares into at the end of the platform? It's real too, but it doesn't connect to anything. It's a dead tunnel, no tracks, no exit, just darkness. A literal symbol of purgatory hiding beneath New York City. Fact: Zex, Macaulay Culkin's role, was almost erased. Yes, that Macaulay Culkin. Before he became a household name with Home Alone, Culkin played Jacob's deceased son, Gabe, in Jacob's Ladder. But initially, the studio wanted to cut him out. They thought the scenes with Gabe slowed the pacing and confused the audience. Adrian Lyne fought back. He argued that Gabe wasn't just a memory, he was Jacob's anchor to reality, the only warmth in a film drowning in despair. Gabe's brief but powerful appearances are intentionally ethereal. He never ages. He always appears when Jacob is at his lowest. That's not accidental. According to Lyne, Gabe represents the spiritual resolution Jacob is seeking the ladder out of his purgatory. And the final moment, where Jacob ascends the staircase with his son, that wasn't originally in the script. It was added after filming ended, when Lyne realized the audience needed a visual symbol of transcendence. Without Culkin's character, the story would have remained locked in nihilism. With him, it became a ghost story about forgiveness. Fact number 7. Tim Robbins wasn't the studio's first choice. It's hard to imagine anyone else as Jacob Singer. But Tim Robbins was not the studio's original pick. Executives initially wanted a bigger name, someone more bankable, preferably in his 40s, with a rugged, tortured look. Actors like Dustin Hoffman, Al Pacino, and even Richard Gere were floated around. But director Adrian Lyne had a different vision. He wanted someone younger, more fragile, someone who looked like he could fall apart. Robbins, known mostly for comedic or offbeat roles at the time, wasn't an obvious choice. But Lyne saw something in his eyes, a quiet panic. During auditions, Robbins didn't overact. He underreacted. And that's what made it terrifying. Jacob wasn't screaming in the face of horror, he was sinking into it. The studio reluctantly agreed, but only after Line threatened to walk if he didn't get his lead. Years later, Robbins would call Jacob's Ladder the hardest film he'd ever made, and perhaps the most personal, because in many ways he wasn't playing madness, he was absorbing it. Fact number 8. The demon designs were inspired by Francis Bacon. The grotesque figures in Jacob's Ladder didn't come from horror films. They came from art. Adrian Lyne and the design team drew direct inspiration from the disturbing paintings of Francis Bacon, a 20th century artist known for his deformed, screaming figures caught in cages of flesh and distortion. Bacon's work wasn't just horrifying, it was philosophical. It represented the breakdown of identity, the erosion of form, the violence of perception itself. Lyne wanted his demons to feel like that, not monsters, but spiritual disfigurements. They lacked horns, claws, or even faces. Some were just vibrating masses. Others were humans with features removed or twisted. One recurring element was the lack of eyes, a visual metaphor for lost humanity. The effects team used prosthetics, body doubles, and in-camera tricks to achieve the surreal shapes. But more importantly, they avoided overexposing the creatures. You only see glimpses, because Lyne believed that what you almost see is scarier than what you fully confront. The final effect wasn't just disturbing, it was existential, a visual scream from a soul trying to remember what it once looked like. Fact number 9. The ice bath scene wasn't fully scripted. One of the most jarring scenes in Jacob's Ladder shows Jacob being thrown into a bathtub filled with ice, screaming, convulsing, unsure if he's dying or waking up. What you may not realize is that wasn't acting. The scene wasn't supposed to be that intense, but the water on set was kept far colder than expected, just above freezing. Tim Robbins, already exhausted from previous takes, was thrown into the tub without much warning. His body genuinely went into shock. His shivering, his panic, the breathless gasps, it was all real. The crew hesitated to keep rolling, but Lyne quietly signaled the camera to keep running. He later admitted it was a risky move. "We pushed him to the edge," he said, "but that's where the truth lived." Robbins wasn't angry. In fact, he later praised the decision, saying it forced him to surrender to the role completely. In that moment, Jacob wasn't just hallucinating. He was being baptized violently into the unreality that would consume him. Fact number 10. The Ladder wasn't just a title, it was theology. Most viewers think the title, Jacob's Ladder, is just a poetic reference. It's not. It's a theological blueprint. The name comes from a biblical vision in the book of Genesis, where Jacob dreams of a ladder reaching from earth to heaven, with angels ascending and descending. In religious texts, this vision is interpreted as a symbol of the soul's journey, a passage between realms, or a trial before transcendence. Bruce Joel Rubin, who studied Eastern philosophy and Christian mysticism, embedded this concept into every layer of the film. Jacob Singer's hallucinations, his guilt, his descent into madness, they're not random. They're tests of purification. The demons that torment him aren't evil. They're guides. In one pivotal scene, a mysterious character tells Jacob, "If you're frightened of dying, and you're holding on, you'll see devils tearing your life away. But if you've made your peace, the devils are really angels, freeing you from the earth." That line wasn't just a metaphor. It was the thesis. The entire film is Jacob's soul climbing the ladder between fear and acceptance, one rung at a time. Fact number 11. Danny Aiello's role was meant to be a priest. Danny Aiello plays Louis, Jacob's soft-spoken chiropractor and occasional spiritual guide. But in the original draft of the script, Louis wasn't a chiropractor. He was a Catholic priest. The decision to change him came late in development, when the filmmakers realized they wanted the film's spiritual themes to feel grounded in the everyday, not overtly religious. So Louis became a physical healer rather than a spiritual one. But his role remained the same. He's the only character in Jacob's life who consistently pulls him out of darkness. Notice how Louis is the only figure unaffected by the film's distortions. He doesn't appear in hallucinations. He's calm, real, present. He literally aligns Jacob's spine restoring order to a body in chaos. Symbolically, he straightens the path toward clarity. Danny Aiello brought warmth to a film drowning in coldness. His monologue in the bathtub scene where he quotes Meister Eckhart, was written at the last minute and delivered in one take. In a film filled with demons and decay, Louis was the one character who radiated grace, and he never needed a collar to prove it. Fact number 12. The entire film takes place in 1 second. If you rewatch Jacob's Ladder after knowing the ending, a chilling truth becomes clear. None of it is real. The film opens with Jacob getting stabbed in the stomach during a firefight in Vietnam. The very next scene cuts to him waking up in New York alive, confused, carrying groceries. But that moment? It's the illusion. The director confirmed in interviews that everything after the stabbing is Jacob's dying brain constructing a narrative in his final moments. Time, in the film, is elastic. Days, weeks, entire relationships unfold, but all within the space of a heartbeat. This technique is drawn from real accounts of near-death experiences, where individuals report complex visions occurring in seconds. Jacob's entire journey, his hallucinations, his descent, his reconciliation, was his mind letting go. The clues are everywhere. Clocks that don't work, people who don't age, scenes that loop or contradict. And at the end, when the army doctor pronounces him dead, it feels sudden, because to Jacob, it wasn't a war. It was the longest second of his life. And the last. Fact number 13. Jacob's apartment was designed like a mental cage. Look closely at Jacob's New York apartment. It's not just cluttered, it's designed to trap him. Production designer Brian Morris intentionally built the apartment with narrow hallways, low ceilings, and poorly lit corners to evoke claustrophobia. The walls are yellowed, decaying, and filled with visual noise. Books stacked chaotically, blinds half open, mirrors placed in strange spots. Jacob doesn't just live there. He's surrounded by reflections of a mind in disarray. And the positioning of furniture is no accident. Tables always cut him off from exits. Doors are partially blocked, and windows either face brick walls or distorted views. The color palette of the apartment subtly shifts over the film. Early scenes feature warmer tones, hope, memory, false comfort. Later, everything turns gray and green, washed in hospital fluorescence. Even the bed Jacob sleeps in was chosen for its frame. Steel, sharp-edged, coffin-like. One crew member described it as an apartment built by anxiety itself. It's not a home. It's a symptom. And like the rest of Jacob's world, it's more prison than shelter. Fact number 14. The burning car scene was stolen from a cult ritual. In one of the film's most surreal moments, Jacob witnesses a burning car surrounded by silent, staring bystanders. No screams, no chaos, just flames and acceptance. That scene wasn't originally in the script. Adrian Lyne added it after coming across a story about a fringe cult ritual in Eastern Europe, where followers would gather in silence and stare at fire as a form of death meditation. He was haunted by the imagery, people confronting destruction not with panic, but with detachment. To recreate it, the crew found an abandoned street in the Bronx and filmed in secret, without permits. The extras were given no lines, only instructions to watch without blinking. The result is chilling, a quiet apocalypse in miniature. The fire represents Jacob's collapsing psyche, consuming any semblance of normalcy. And those faces? They weren't demons, they were witnesses. Because sometimes horror isn't what's burning, it's how calmly we watch it burn. Fact number 15. The party scene contains a possession you probably missed. The chaotic party scene midway through the film seems like just another hallucination. But buried inside it is one of the film's most disturbing moments, so subtle, most viewers miss it. As Jacob dances with Jezzie, the camera spins, lights strobe, and the music blares. But then Jezzie's face begins to change. For just a few frames, something inhuman emerges from her. Her mouth opens unnaturally wide. A tongue or something like it flickers. Her eyes roll back. And then, it's gone. That effect wasn't CGI. It was achieved using prosthetics and rapid editing to simulate possession, layered over actress Elizabeth Pena's movements. The sequence was inspired by real accounts of spiritual seizures, events where individuals report being ridden by otherworldly entities during heightened emotional states. Lyne called it the moment Jacob realizes even pleasure has been corrupted. The nightclub, once a symbol of escape, becomes a gateway to something infernal. And Jezzie, once a lover, becomes a vessel. That night wasn't about lust. It was a warning. Fact number 16. The film was secretly screened for veterans before release. Before its theatrical debut, Jacob's Ladder was shown to a private audience of Vietnam veterans without press, without announcements. The goal wasn't marketing. It was a test of emotional accuracy. Producers were concerned the film might be seen as exploitative or disrespectful to those who lived through the war. So they arranged a closed screening with a group of former soldiers, psychologists, and trauma counselors. What happened shocked them. Several veterans reportedly broke down in tears during the screening, not because of the horror, but because of how accurately it depicted post-traumatic disassociation. They recognized the hospital, the noise, the panic attacks, the sense of reality slipping sideways. One attendee said, "It was like watching a dream I've had for 20 years. Bruce Joel Rubin, present at the screening, later called it the most validating moment of the entire project. What was intended as horror had become, for some, a mirror. And mirrors don't comfort. They confront. Fact number 17. The crew followed a real funeral procession to get the ending right. The final scene of Jacob's Ladder shows Jacob lying peacefully as his body is covered with a white sheet. The war fades. The chaos ends. He is finally still. To capture the emotional tone of this scene, the crew didn't rely on imagination. They followed a real military funeral at Arlington National Cemetery at a distance, quietly observing how the military handles death. Adrian Lyne wanted to understand the ritual of letting go, the hand on the flag, the way the coffin moves, the stillness of grief. What they witnessed wasn't sadness, it was formality, precision, a machine of mourning. That cold beauty made its way into the film. Jacob's death is not chaotic. It is clinical, silent, and almost sacred. The final fade to white wasn't symbolic. It was taken directly from the funeral, the moment when light hits the coffin just right. Because in war, even death must follow protocol. Fact number 18. The film was almost rated X. Jacob's Ladder nearly didn't make it to theaters. When submitted to the MPAA, the film received an initial rating of X, a classification typically reserved for pornography or extreme violence. The board cited sustained psychological horror, disturbing imagery, and themes of torture and madness as the main reasons. Adrian Lyne refused to cut the heart of the film, but the studio feared the X rating would kill its release. Eventually, a compromise was reached. A few seconds were trimmed from the hospital sequence, and a close-up of a twitching, faceless infant was blurred. With those adjustments, the film secured an R rating. Ironically, the changes made the film more effective. What was left unseen became more terrifying. Lyne later admitted, "They thought they were censoring me, but really they sharpened the blade. In cutting the flesh, they exposed the nerve." Fact number 19. The film influenced Silent Hill more than any movie. If you've ever played Silent Hill, you've seen the shadows of Jacob's Ladder everywhere. The eerie fog, the disjointed reality, the twitching monsters, the sirens, the idea of a personal hell constructed by guilt. Game designer Keiichiro Toyama has openly credited Jacob's Ladder as a primary influence on the entire Silent Hill aesthetic. The twitching head movements, pioneered by Adrian Lyne using low shutter speeds and frame skips, were directly mimicked in the game's monster animations. Even the concept of the otherworld, a shifting dimension between life, death, and trauma, is lifted wholesale from the structure of the film. What Jacob's Ladder did for horror cinema, Silent Hill did for psychological gaming. It made horror personal. The enemy wasn't a creature, it was your guilt. And the environment wasn't haunted, it was you. The legacy is undeniable. Without Jacob's Ladder, there would be no nurses with no faces, no fog-covered towns, and no nightmares you can't wake from, even when your console is off. Fact number 20. The film was a grief memoir in disguise. Bruce Joel Rubin didn't write Jacob's Ladder to scare anyone. He wrote it to cope. In interviews years after the film's release, Rubin revealed that the story was born from his personal experience with the sudden death of his son. The fragmented memories, the feeling of being stuck between worlds, the denial, the hallucinations they weren't imagined. They were grief, disguised as narrative. Writing Jacob's Ladder became a kind of exorcism, a way to explore what it means to lose someone and still feel them everywhere. Rubin layered religious philosophy, Buddhist reincarnation, and Christian mysticism into the script, but at its core, it's about a father who can't let go. The demons are guilt, the visions are memory, the descent is mourning. And the ladder? It's the act of forgiving yourself enough to move on. That's why the final scene is so quiet. Because grief never ends loudly. It just stops echoing. Bonus fact. Jezzie was her real name. Throughout the film, Jacob's girlfriend is called Jezzie, a seductive, impulsive presence, pulling him deeper into the nightmare. But that name wasn't chosen at random. Jezzie is a shortened form of Jezebel, the infamous biblical queen associated with temptation, manipulation, and spiritual downfall. In Scripture, Jezebel is a false idol offering power and desire at the cost of the soul. In Jacob's Ladder, Jezzie embodies everything that anchors Jacob to the illusion: lust, denial, pleasure over pain. She laughs when he mentions his dead son. She mocks his memories. She pulls him into sex when he's screaming from visions. And yet, she feels real. The final twist? In Jacob's real life before the war, Jezzie didn't exist. She was a hallucination, a coping mechanism, a devil in disguise. The only woman he truly loved was his wife, Sarah, the one we barely see, the one fading from his mind. Jezzie was never a person. She was purgatory wearing perfume. And once Jacob lets her go, the ladder appears. Which of these facts made you question everything you thought you knew about Jacob's Ladder? Drop your favorite in the comments and let us know which film we should dissect next. If you found yourself sinking into this world of war, hallucination, and hidden meaning, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow us down the next rabbit hole. Because sometimes, the scariest truths are the ones buried behind the credits.